A very warm welcome to the UK Research and Innovation Circular Economy Programme Launch Week. I'm Sharon Borley from the Royal College of Art, Director of the Textiles Circularity Centre, and we are getting the proceedings of the Launch Week going this morning. I'd like to start by playing a film which brings to life the vision of the Textiles Circularity Centre. So thank you to Amber Anderson, creative, for producing our film. So the circular economy is about designing out waste and pollution, keeping products and materials in use and regenerating natural systems. As our film articulates, our vision for a circular textiles economy emerges and is shaped by people's participation in it in order to create a coupling between the resource flow and well-being. And we can only achieve the ambitions of a circular economy if all elements of well-being are collectively satisfied. So there are a wide range of people involved in building our vision in the Textiles Circularity Centre through our 3 research strands: material circularity, consumer experience, and circular supply chain. We're a highly interdisciplinary research community, involving disciplines from materials biology, materials science, materials design, advanced manufacturing, robotics, life cycle analysis, human-centered design, social science, cognitive neuroscience, multisensory experience, psychology, human-computer interaction, supply chain design and business models, and computer science. Involving researchers at different stages of their academic careers at the University of York, Cranfield, Leeds, Manchester, University College London, Cambridge, and the Royal College of Art. We are a highly diverse community, involving partners from all parts of our supply chain and our system design, from industry partners, industry associations, NGOs and charities, consumer groups, local government, and consumer advocacy groups, who are all participating in and shaping this research journey. So moving on to the order of proceedings, I'm shortly going to hand over to my colleague Miriam Smith, who's leading the material circularity research strand, who will give a short presentation on the material circularity strand, and that will be followed by a Q&A facilitated by Adam Mansell, who's CEO of the UK Fashion and Textiles Association. Then that's followed by Bruna Petrecka giving an overview of consumer experience research strand, and then Steve Evans giving an overview of the circular supply chain research strand. We finish our session this morning through a number of stakeholder groups for networking sessions, because we're continually seeking new partnerships with different stakeholder groups. So we hope that you'll stay on for that. So I'd now like to hand over to Miriam Smith, who will present the material circularity research strand.
Hello, I'm Miriam Smith, and I will introduce you to the approach and processes of the material circularity research strand to transform post-consumer textiles, crop residues, and the organic fraction of waste in a new textiles production model that is circular and uses local and abundant underutilized waste streams in the UK. We will develop a blueprint for global waste resource flows that empowers people and local industries as a transition strategy until all waste is eliminated for a circular system across all sectors. A long-term view of the present and future environmental and social challenges associated with the current textile production model and the growing use of resources presents an opportunity to design alternative systems for textiles in the context of a circular bioeconomy. New alternative realities for textiles will enable multi-stakeholder engagement and new sustainable interconnections between people, materials, and their processes. We take a fully integrated approach between the recycling, fabrication, and use phases in order to transform textiles in infinite loops. Our interdisciplinary approach in the material circularity research strand equally integrates circular design, biotechnology, material science, advanced manufacturing, and whole life cycle assessment through our partners at the Universities of York, Manchester, Leeds, Cranfield, with the RCA. Our alternative systems for textiles will emerge by recycling of bio-waste and textiles in transparent translations of material transformations in biotechnological processes, through to circular design with cultures of participation of designers in biotechnology, material science, and advanced manufacturing, and then distribution of our processes for on-demand, customized, and sustainable textiles that are maintained in use. Our materials journey begins with a biotech process to enable closed-loop textile recycling and complement the current challenges in mechanical recycling that mostly results in lower grade textile products, and only 1% of textiles currently being recycled in a closed loop through chemical technologies. We will develop a platform of collaborations with innovative partners for circular fibers and material processes. The challenges in manufacturing and design of circular textiles will be in radically reducing the impacts in textile production and processing through the design of new machines with embedded functionality, circularity, and sustainability. Our approach will move beyond the replacement of fibers and materials in the current textile production model and propose completely new ways for how circular textiles are made. Finally, we will complete the whole life cycle through enabling a continuity of our processes for recycling and manufacturing by designing the use of our textiles for designers, consumers, manufacturers, and retailers to participate in material circularity technologies and processes for distributed manufacture and material maintenance. Our alternative systems for textiles will emerge by using enzymes and microbes for biochemical recycling of biowaste and production of monomers and polymers for high quality and sustainable fibers and textiles, as well as for the textiles we produce to become the feedstock for future clothes. Our biorefinery approach will transform the cellulose component of biowaste, as well as look at components from protein-based waste such as wool, and explore a wide range of textiles and fiber types. We will use clean spinning processes of regenerated fibers with introduction of natural dyes, and biomanufacture textiles from waste with novel functional and aesthetic properties through direct synthesis of textile panels and composites. We will adapt and apply innovative transdisciplinary methodologies to respond to the properties of recycled and regenerated materials and develop circular textile design processes that blur the boundaries between design and science disciplines. This design program will interact with the integration of advanced manufacturing processes for 2D and 3D woven and non-woven textiles with additive manufacturing, which will result in zero waste finished textiles, enabling distributed manufacture that is adapted to user needs. In the design of use, we will enable material maintenance by designers, consumers, manufacturers, and retailers through the development of innovative tools and methods for either repair or novel material transformation techniques. Whole life cycle assessment of the social, environmental, and economic value of our processes will ensure that our alternative textile realities are both sustainable and circular, from which new consumer experiences and supply chains can evolve in the Textiles Circularity Centre. Thank you.
Thank you, Miriam. I'd now like to hand over to Adam Mansell, who will now facilitate the Q&A for the Material Circularity Group. And joining Miriam is Prasad Potluri, Paolo Bartolo, Kian Vyas, Vivek Konchari, Samir Rahetika, and Phil Purnell.
Thank you, Sharon, and thank you very much indeed, Miriam. Absolutely fascinating. It's great to see something that's so ambitious, but also certainly from my side, looking after the supply chain end of the industry, something that's incredibly exciting. If I sort of launch into the first question, then for everyone else listening in, please do post as many questions as you can. A question for the group, really, but maybe Miriam, if you answer this one first. The development of this biochemical process, will this enable the production of virgin materials for using the post-consumer waste? Will you be able to produce brand new virgin materials?
I would like to pass on this question to the leads of the biochemical process, which is Professor Simon McQueen-Mason and Dr. Alexandra Len at the University of York. Thank you.
Okay, hi, thank you. So the way that we do things is, rather than trying to mechanically recover fibers from end-of-life textiles, what we do is break them back down to their monomeric composition, and we then resynthesize, and principally we're focused on cellulose at the moment. We can do this with other materials, but principally we then resynthesize brand new cellulose from that material, which can go towards the production of new fibers, etc. And that cellulose is then it's virgin quality, so the textiles that you can produce from that are themselves virgin quality. And by depolymerizing the materials down to their original monomers and then remaking them, we can get rid of the colors and finishings from those processes as well. So you basically end up with a brand new starting point from which to make your textiles, using the materials that initially, if you like, come from either waste textiles, or we can bring in components from crop waste, etc. as well.
Just following up on that, what sort? I mean, you said crop waste and post-consumer textiles. When you say crop waste, what are you talking about, so that someone like me who's not on the science end of it can get an understanding?
Yeah, so crop residues are cellulosic materials essentially, but the cellulose is mixed with lots of other things. So yeah, the same cellulose that you get from cotton is in most plant materials. Most woody plant fibers have cellulose, but it's integrated with other components, particularly lignin, which is really problematic to get rid of. And so in like a pulping process for trees, you have to get rid of that lignin chemically before you can use the cellulose, and that's environmentally and economically a very expensive process to undertake. What we do is we actually just use digestive enzymes to hydrolyze the material down into its building blocks, and then we use bacteria that take the glucose, which is what the cellulose is made out of, and make new cellulose out of that glucose that's now free of all those contaminating components as well. So hence you can get this virgin quality cellulose from crop residues, and then use that for textiles.
Right. And the bio-based process, does that use less resources than the normal processing? So the water and energy type thing that goes into producing these new materials?
Yes. So we need a bit of, well, we need water, and we do need some processing chemicals at the start, but the amounts of these are a lot less than are used in conventional processes for processing cellulosics for textile applications, if you like. And the use of digestive enzymes, particularly, instead of using harsh chemicals for processes, is really beneficial, because these work at ambient sorts of temperatures just in water, rather than having to use very caustic chemicals. So that's the real process advantage there, if you like.
Okay, we're getting some questions coming through now. This one is about I guess the state of the textiles that you're going to be recycling. There are a lot of coating and additives and various kinds on textiles, and how will a lot of those are inorganic chemical compounds, and how does the biological process deal with those coatings and treatments and dyes and things like that?
Yes, at the moment, the way we do things is if you take a dyed finished textile, and we've done this with a number of different textiles now, we can digest those down into the glucose monomers and make the new cellulose that's then free of those dyes and finishes. Part of the research that we haven't done yet is what we then do with those dyes and finishes at the end of the process. So the big advantage is that that moves recycling into a completely different space, in terms of going from something that's a mixture of colors and finishes, which is then extremely hard to reprocess into a good material. We've got that bit sorted out. We will need to work on what we then do with those dyes and finishes at the end of the process. But the key component where we are at the moment is that we can move from those dyed and finished end-of-life materials into virgin quality new cellulose for applications.
Another question that's come in that is asked of me all the time when it comes to reprocessing and recycling is, what are you going to do with blends? In particular, this question was around polycotton blends. So do you have to have two different approaches, one for the polyester bit and one for the cotton bit? How's it going to work?
Yeah, well, essentially, I'm sorry, I'm taking all these questions. If Miriam, tell me to shut up if I'm being inappropriate. We've worked on processing polycotton blends because that's one of the big issues in the whole recycling area. And what we find is that we can very readily digest all of the cotton out of those polyester cotton blends. We can then use the glucose that comes from that to make new cellulose. It then liberates the polyester. At the moment, we are looking at conventional polyester recycling because at least you can now take that was a mixture and it can go into a sort of a melt blend type technology. What we're also very interested in is that there's been some very exciting developments on enzymes for recycling polyesters, particularly in the plastics area, and that technology has actually been commercialized fairly recently in France. So, and that's basically been targeted at drinking bottles, which are polyester materials as well. But there's absolutely no reason why that technology couldn't be brought to the polyesters, which are then broken again down into their monomers, which could be resynthesized chemically from that point of view. So the approach we're taking basically does open up the opportunity to deal with those blends.
Another very interesting question, this one, is that it's around food waste, and the questioner says that a lot of food waste goes into anaerobic digestion, and they're asking whether you've looked at the digestate from that process. So a lot of it goes in the production of methane, and what's left after that process is digestate, which is normally put onto agricultural land, and they wonder if that's one of the raw materials you might be looking at using here.
To be honest, we haven't tried it. So one of the issues in anaerobic digesters is, well, one of the things that doesn't digest very well is cellulose. And as a consequence, you can get an accumulation of cellulosic fibers in digestate. So certainly there is a potential source of cellulosic raw material in there. And it's something that we certainly could bring into considering, but we haven't looked at it yet.
This is the questions seem to be following on from each other, which is fantastic. So the different question now, but do you think there's going to be any particular tensions between different industries? So there's going to be a demand on the food waste going into the agri-food business and for things like composting. Do you think there's going to be a sort of a tension between who uses what material?
Yeah, I do believe that's true. So yeah, that's something that is often spoken about in the waste sector in general. You know, you can consider there are tensions between things going to incineration where there's some energy production, but we know that it's, you know, the emissions are really, you know, undesirable. So I think what this does is it opens up higher value applications for some of these waste streams, and not all waste streams will be completely suitable for this process. So, you know, the systems we work on will work most effectively if focused, you know, so we can develop a technology that works really well with end-of-life textiles. We will need slightly different process conditions for crop residues, and the attractive part about crop residues is that the composition is fairly constrained, if you like. You know what's in there at the start. Food waste is tricky material. So I mean, most processes that work on food waste to really garner value from it work with industrial food waste, if you like. So not post-consumer food waste, because that's typically really messy. Whereas if you can, you know, get potato peelings or even the ends of loaves of bread, you can do all sorts of things with them. I think one of the most exciting areas that we work on in terms of this is that we work with a company that takes, or has the potential at least, to take completely unsorted municipal waste, for example, which contains food waste, and it autoclaves that material so that it sterilizes it and homogenizes it. You can remove all the plastics, glass, and metal for recycling. And what you're left with is a fiber material which contains all of the biological components of the waste system. And that's a nice homogeneous substrate that works very well in our hands for this process. And that consolidates all of those kind of post-consumer wastes into one material. And that, I think, is a really exciting opportunity for the waste system and also for the sorts of technologies that we're working on.
A question from me. One of the obvious streams of textiles that could be reprocessed comes from garment manufacturers, particularly here in the UK. And I was particularly pleased to see the focus on UK manufacturing. Have you got any sense of how much waste material could be reused from our CMT, our cut, make and trim industry here in the UK? Because certainly when I speak to manufacturers here in the UK, they say they are so careful over the resources that they use in terms of the actual textiles and making sure that the lay plans and the cutting process is so accurate that there is as little waste as possible. So how are you going to introduce, particularly in an industry where in the UK most of our garment manufacturers are small factories, you know, they employ 30, 40 people, how are you going to introduce them into this new supply chain?
That may be a question better suited to Steve Evans, perhaps. Certainly, from my perspective, in terms of the process technology we work on, we would have no problem with handling that. Obviously, there are logistic concerns that you pointed out about how you consolidate that and get sufficient quantity to process it. But I think I'd leave that to the supply chain end to answer that question. Prasad.
If I may, yeah, in a related but not direct handling of cutting waste, in this project, in this center, we are also trying to innovate using robotics and advanced manufacturing, how to minimize the waste in the first place. For example, trying to make a pair of jeans almost near to the shape or 95% near to the shape. So you waste only 2 or 3% rather than 30 to 40% that you would do on a cutting table.
Thank you for that. Another question that's come through, and I think this will apply across all of the different research streams, is around measuring. You know, how do you measure circularity? How do you measure sustainability? What criteria are you going to use to measure your research and then put that into the marketplace so that we all know, both as consumers, but those in the supply chain as well, that what they're doing is making a difference?
Shall I take that one, Miriam? That's a very thorny question, and that'll be a question that's common across all the centres that you see presented over the next few weeks. What do we actually mean when we talk about circularity, and in particular, what do we mean when we talk about sustainable circularity? And, you know, built into this project certainly is a way of trying to wrestle with that problem, understanding first and foremost that it's not just a technical issue. This is not just about measuring carbon or measuring microfibers or measuring water use. It's also about measuring jobs. It's also about measuring the quality of materials. It's also about measuring the impact on communities, be they positive or negative. And it's also about measuring how, where and when those impacts are generated. So a lot of the measures we've taken in this country to purportedly reduce our impact on the environment have actually simply shifted our impacts to other countries. So part of what we'll be doing in this project is looking at how you can actually do that kind of holistic measurement, how you can measure whether you are or aren't being sustainable and circular across a multiple number of dimensions. So that's not just the technical, but the social and the economic and the environmental, and understanding how you can pull all that together. And we've got some experience from previous projects of doing that, but a big part of this project will be building that methodology that allows people to actually do this assessment across different domains of value.
And very briefly, if you would, because we're coming to the end of our session now, have you got plans to internationalize those measurements? Because it's all well and good having one in the UK, but I know we've got European and indeed broader colleagues from further afield. But are we going to internationalize those sort of measurements? Because we need to have a uniform system, I would assume. Yeah,
and to be honest, that's a problem above the pay grade of almost everybody on this call, I'd imagine. But yes, I mean we have to make sure that anything that we put together is applicable on an international scale. And the key thing to that really is transparency. One of the problems with so many of our environmental impact measuring systems, whatever you might want to call them, is that they're not really terribly transparent. They rely on an awful lot of proprietary software and proprietary databases, so it can be very, very difficult to see what's actually going on behind the graphs and the numbers. So the main watchword for internationalization for us will be transparency, making sure that what we do is transparent, that it's open source, that it can be picked apart and put back together again by anyone who's got access to the data.
That's great. Thank you, Phil, and thank you, Miriam, and thank you everybody else on the panel. And Sharon, back to you.
Great, thank you very much. Very interesting discussions there and lots of challenges. I'd now like to hand over to my colleague, Bruna Petreka, who will take you through the consumer experience research strand. Over to you, Bruna.
Good morning, I'm Bruna Petreka, and I'm here representing my colleagues to introduce you to the consumer experience research strand. In the consumer experience research strand, we'll put consumers at the heart of circular economy, and we will do so through consumer experience design that gives citizens agency to participate in the circular economy. At present, there is a gap in ethical consumption, where we see consumers really struggling to join the dots between their intention and their action. And this means that consumers are still struggling to navigate and to understand how they can contribute to this. This is intensified by the complexities of the systems, as we saw in the previous presentation from my colleagues in the materials strand. And these complexities are starting to unfold in front of consumers as they start to be exposed, for example, to variety of new materials development or the transparency in the supply chain, which are critical for the circular economy. And we have a challenging consumer experience to facilitate these processes so that consumers become an active part in a circular textiles economy. And having these new circular textiles at hand, we also have a challenge to position them. We know that we have always a challenge in reducing the lead time for materials acceptance and market uptake. But in this case, we also need to make sure that they come embedded in sustainable cultures of consumption. To address these challenges, we're taking a deep dive into human well-being to understand how we can bring people to action. And we're doing this with a number of our consortium of partners cover a wide range of human-centered approaches with an interdisciplinary team from the Royal College of Art and University College London. And we offer a broad view from humans, from the individual through the social, through human-centered design, social sciences, human-computer interaction, psychology, and neuroscience. Oops, there's some slip on the slide there. Our contributions, they involve increasing consumer participation across the whole flow of materials. And this is underpinned by our understanding of well-being factors. And we will consider consumers in textiles development, where we want to understand how we can inform and be informed by the experiences that people have with textiles. We will also engage consumers in co-creation of products, and we will work closely with design brands to reimagine participation. And we will design consumer experiences and technology that enable consumers to be immersed in textile circularity. Our research will be housed at the Product Cultures Lab, and this is a physical and virtual space where we will co-create new realities of circularity with people. We are creating experiential environments with innovative methods and technologies, and with that we'll develop and test multiple aspects of the textile materiality and circularity that will be done in the lab and in the wild. Scenarios will enable us to work alongside our industry partners and closely to consumers to iteratively create and test this new culture of consumption that we are proposing. Through what we call the configurator, which is the main concept encapsulating everything in our consumer experience trend, we will create new experiences for a consumer to explore and select textiles and to assemble them in products. And these new interactions, they will be enhanced or supported by technologies that bring awareness enhance exploration, and also enable us to immerse people in the textile circularity. Multisensory interactions will unlock experiences from provenance to end of life, immersing people in textile circularity. Sensing technologies enables people to explore their own and others' understanding of textiles through their experience. And participation in the design of products will allow us to diversify the types of pleasure that people can experience, co-creating products and value. And with all this, we hope to facilitate a change in cultures of consumption and adoption of these new textiles, offering now an alternative to the fast fashion model. This new culture is based on a new relationship between consumers and their products, where we start to see consumers more as custodians of the textiles. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much, Bruna. Bruna is now joined by the consumer experience team, Carrie Jewett, Nadia Bertuz, Young-Jun Cho, Ekaterina Fotopoulou, and Mariana Obrist. Over to you, Adam.
Thank you, Bruna. For me, this is one of the key areas of where behaviour needs to change. And I think there's been a lot of focus on the supply chain end and the materials bit, but we've always kind of forgotten the consumer. And my very first question really is quite a broad question. This is an industry that, however you dress it up, is driven by endless consumption. The reason that there's so much textiles in landfill is because we buy so much. Is any part of the research that the consumer experience team are going to do to look at ways in which we can, as consumers, can change our behavior to reduce consumption?
I think this is an interesting question in terms of the general approach that we're having in the consumer experience trend, because we're really looking into ways of decoupling the satisfaction from material consumption. So when we say that we're going to take this deep dive into human well-being, we're thinking about a range of approaches that we can take to really tap into other aspects of well-being that might be related to, for example, education, or for example, getting skills where people come to start to co-create their products. It might be to also exploring and understanding further how materials, where the materials come from in the materials life cycle. And it may also mean that we're thinking about different offers that, as you saw in the presentation, we have a huge technological component in our work because we're really hypothesizing that through technology, we can diversify the types of consumption offers that we can have. So I think I would like to ask two colleagues to contribute to this question a little bit, Katerina, if we could talk about this long-term notion of well-being and how we see this decoupling of the materials consumption from satisfaction. And then I'd like to ask Mariana to maybe give a little bit of insight into these new offers around immersing people in different kinds of technology experiences.
Thank you, Bruna, and thank you, everyone. Indeed, we live in a time where we consume products that are material, but we also consume information. I was reading the other day, we spent about 3,000 times touching our face. We've been doing that for centuries. Now we spend about 3,000 times a day touching our phones. And what our phones have is information, and they constantly give us likes, and we are hooked to this constant reinforcement, satisfactory, reward-driven, nudging kind of culture. But this isn't necessarily how our brains and minds are made. So psychologists have been studying these for centuries, and they tell us that things that actually drive us are things like social recognition and relatedness, our life history, meaning making, how we understand ourselves. And we've built the kind of products and we build the kind of communities that by consuming materials, that's how we brand ourselves and experience the world. And that all relies in a sort of a view of this whole system as though we are on the one hand, the producers, and then the consumers are these passive creatures that we need to nudge or convince or incentivize. And we in this project are starting all over again, seeing it in a different way. So what if we were all on the same side? What if we are not the ones educating or lecturing or providing, but what if we are participating with our consumers in the creation of value? That is the only way we believe to do it. Because you don't have an ethical or a moral, you don't add to people's already pressured life another imperative delivered by somebody else in a world that they don't control and they have to fulfill. Instead, you start with empathy, if you like, with trying to understand what is it that people feel when they put on a t-shirt. What is it that people communicate when they have actually designed that t-shirt? And what is it what people trust? We call that epistemic trust. When a company tells them that this is the way this material has been made, this is how long it can accompany your life story, and this is how it can find the same material itself back into the production so it doesn't destroy the planet.
I think that summarized very well where we're going. And I think the only thing I would like to add is that we can really capitalize on new technologies. We are now having particular sensing and multisensory technologies. So you can make the invisible visible. Particularly what we want to connect is where the material comes from and how it reaches the status it has right now. So you can make the textile properties visible and experiential for the user. They can feel where it comes from, but they can also get a smell, and they have the audiovisual journey of the material, which we can recreate. And so we are creating this engagement, playfulness, but also we know that multisensory experiences have a strong link to emotions and memory. So creating this connection, so going away from establishing a relationship to textiles and not just see it as a throwaway.
Can I follow up on that? This is a question from me. One of my big concerns is the wrong expression. When we're all asked to serve in a survey how we view circularity or how we view sustainability or the green economy, we all tick all the right boxes, we all say all the right things. We then walk into a high street retailer and we do not care. The only thing we look at is, do we look good in it? How much does it cost? Those are the two things that drive purchasing in this industry for the vast majority of purchasing decisions. I understand the experience piece, but how are you going to change everyone's mental approach to, that's a really nice t-shirt and it only cost £1, so I'm having 6 of them? Question.
That's a very good question. I can give you an example from a different project we did where we used multisensory technology, immersive technology in climate change, where you embody a tree. So you're growing from a small seed to a large tree, and you experience this life circle of a tree till you get cut down, and you're getting the message of deforestations. We have to do something, otherwise where are we left? So what I want to say is we need to create a narrative. We need to create a story that tells the story of the textile material and make it personal, make it meaningful. We are not saying we are changing a person's behavior from today to tomorrow in 4 years, but it's a long-term engagement where you make people aware of what is actually surrounding them and what they are doing. So I think this kind of multisensory storytelling, making it meaningful, is where we kind of want to dive into.
I think if I can just add as well, I think what Kat and Mariana are showing as well is the potential to have a different kind of experience when you consume. So yes, like money, is important for everybody, and for some people more than others, really shapes their decisions and choices, the options people have. But if we can kind of build narratives around a kind of playful experience that isn't all around purchasing each time we go into a shop, that it kind of shifts the notion of what retail is, and this creates a different kind of relationship between kind of retail products, consumption and designer, then I think this idea of experience and narratives stretches, and that responds to one of the questions that we were asked in the chat here, is, you know, isn't part of the work to actually reduce consumption. And I think what we're trying to do is kind of rethink what consumption can be, what that experience can be. And so that kind of is so that the change isn't a loss. You know, it isn't like, oh, I can't have nice things anymore. I can't, you know, it's a kind of becomes this worthy experience. What we're doing is trying to create a playful, connected experience in which you're kind of giving people different options for consumption that don't take away, they change the immediacy of the purchase, but they offer something other instead.
Thank you for that. A question again that's come through the chat, but also from me, is around how is the project, particularly this consumer piece, going to engage with policymakers, with government? I mean, I know that currently the UK government have got a consultation out on extended producer responsibility, and textiles is one of the 5 key materials that they're looking at. And indeed, the Textiles Circularity Centre is highlighted in that consultation as part of the research that's going to help shift the way that everyone in the supply chain, including consumers, looks at this. My question is, on the back of that, are there policy drivers that you think the government should be looking at? And a key example, I guess, is probably the tax on plastic bags and how that's changed our behaviour. Are there policy drivers that you think the government should be looking at that can help consumers change their behaviour?
Do you want me to pick that up, Adam, very briefly? So the tax on plastic bags is an excellent case in point. And if you actually analyse the data from plastic bag use, the tax on plastic bags has almost driven out the use of single-use plastic bags, but it's massively increased the use of bags for life. And there's some reasonably good evidence that in actual fact, the total amount of plastic that's been converted into bags has probably increased. Now, your argument could be that, you know, the object was to remove thin gauge bags from the environment, but, you know, it certainly had unintended effects. So one of the things that, you know, we're doing is working closely with an organisation who help liaise between governments and Academia Policy Connect in order to make sure that when these things are actually designed, they're not designed as a knee-jerk reaction to an article in the Sunday Times, but they're actually designed with proper input, not just from academics and people with policy experience, but from manufacturers, from grassroots organisations, from consumer organisations, to make sure that whatever regulations are put in place actually drive the behaviour that we want to drive, which is to reduce the amount of plastic in the environment, to reduce the carbon emissions associated with the manufacture of plastic, and of course to reduce the amount of waste that are associated with textiles.
Another question from me is that there's obviously a huge focus here on changing consumer behaviour and doing it in a different way. How important do you think it is going to be to reach through to schools? I mean, you know, there's a lot of educators and researchers and universities on this call, but how important is it going to be to engage schools and teachers and parents to get the young to change their behaviour? So a bit like we're seeing now with Gen Z changing the way they shop. How do we reach whatever the Gen is after Gen Z?
So for that one, I think we started by identifying some key actors or partners that we want to engage with. So we have, for example, one of our partners is called On Road, and they're going to be gatekeepers facilitating our access to the youth, particularly teenagers. We will be growing this approach also through engaging with what we call this sustainability enthusiasts, or, you know, all of these people that are having a great presence in social media, which is so important for those generations now. So we are through events like this and other events where we're going to be hosting open lab events, and even what I mentioned in the presentation earlier, this Product Cultures Lab, which is a platform that we will create to really bring almost like a platform for the community to attach themselves to. And we're not hoping that in this research, when we engage with consumers, this is a one-off. We really hope to build a relationship where these people can be heard and also that this will be critical in how we create and develop our research. I'd like to ask Carrie to maybe contribute to this, because she's so used to also engaging with this different communities in her research.
Yeah, hi. I think it is really vital, just to respond to the question, to get young people involved in this, and young people are at the forefront of, many young people are at the forefront of textile circularity and kind of looking at alternative ways of working, of consumption and just kind of ways of living. But it's a very elite group as well, and our team's quite dedicated to trying to speak beyond the kind of, I suppose, the vanguard of textile circularity, if you like. So we can do that by connecting out to the grassroots groups that Bruna's saying, by connecting out to through different organisations out to different demographics of young people through the Product Cultures Lab, but also like we've got for is it not Design Week, it's the Circular Economy Week. We're going out to a shopping centre in town in London. So we're kind of just do some kind of basic outreach in that sense. But I think it's important, a bit like how Miriam and the material strand, they're not going to kind of, you know, recreate all textiles in the UK by the end of the 4 years of this project, but they're going to create models and ways of working. And in the same way, we're not imagining that we're going to change the landscape of consumption for any demographic of people, but we'll have models and theories and ways of doing that. And we'll have like the start of that will enable other people to kind of come in and refine it around their particular products and their particular ways of working. So, you know, to avoid seeming naive around kind of our kind of mission for consumption. But I think there is a real interest amongst young people, and particularly those who don't have much money as well. I mean, although we can all go to, like, you know, high street, very cheap, you know, ethically concerning shops to engage with fast fashion, ultimately it's a rather unsatisfying experience. Both in terms of like the length of, you know, life of those products. I mean, I know that's kind of part of the fast fashion change, but I think there's a lot that can be changed there. That's very unsatisfying for people that don't have much money and don't have much options in the kind of fashion industry. So yeah.
That's great, Carrie. Sorry, we're just run out of time, so sorry to talk over you, but thank you all very much indeed. Sharon, back to you.
Great. Thank you very much. So I'd now like to introduce Steve Evans, who's now going to give a brief introduction on the supply chain research strand. Over to you, Steve.
Morning, everything. Morning, everyone. I think everything's already been said, so I'm just going to try and put some glue in and stick some of these pieces together, I hope. And I'm going to do that with the help of my colleague Ali Asadipur from the Royal College of Art. We're a very small supply chain in this part of the research of the overall project. You've heard about these amazing new materials and you've heard about these amazing new consumption experiences. It is very clear that with those new cultures of consumption, that we're going to need very, very new ways of designing and making things and new supply chains. And that's the problem that we're trying to solve. We're not trying to invent a new problem or a new behavior. We're trying to build supply chains that work with these new materials and new consumption experiences. So in a way, if we do our job really well, you won't notice us. You'll notice the amazing materials and the amazing consumption experience, but you won't notice what we've done. If we do it really badly, there'll be these amazing materials and amazing experiences that aren't reaching people in volume and at speed. And that's the problem that we're trying to solve. We know that a new material, for example, can easily take 2 decades before people start specifying it in volume, before people start designing and making garments that you see in the high street in volume using that new material. We don't have 20 years. We've got to get that number down to 2 years. So if these materials turn out to be amazing, If these experiences turn out to be amazing, we need to build the tools in this research strand that will get it into daily use in volume within 2 years of the end of this project. That's what we're trying to do. It's quite a problem, and we think that we need to build probably 3 tools to do that. This slide refers to those. We talk about the digital transparency tool and the biomaterials platform, very specifically allowing people, designers and consumers, to access information that will make it easier to trust and to use and to access those new materials and new consumption experiences. We talk about a third tool, the circular supply chain configurator, which is trying to help people generate a new supply chain architecture. So if this supply chain architecture is emerging that is much more open, much more agile than is typical. So for example, what's one of the problems we've got to solve? Miriam refers to umpteen millions of tons of wheat straw, but it doesn't come from a commodity distributor. It's on farms distributed everywhere. And if you have a wet week, it doesn't appear. And then you have a couple of dry weeks and tons of it appear. And so the intermittency of supply, location and timing and volume and quality introduces new variables into supply chain design that we typically don't deal with in the current textile supply chain. That's done so many steps removed from manufacturing that by the time it gets anywhere near cut and sew, it's all flattened. It's all dealt with. It's dealt with 3 steps behind on the supply chain in the relationship between farmers and distributors and mills. And we're bringing it much closer to the consumer. So we have to deal with a number of challenges of that sort if we're going to get everyone involved in this new, what we call culture of cooperation. We're trying to build new material and information flows, but we need to build that around new value flows. And I believe the conversation that everyone was just having was about how value flows in the system. What do we mean by a culture of consumption? It might be that future customers, some of them, a subset, become a new type of fast fashionista where we talk about fast cycles. But it doesn't matter if I have a fast cycle of garment use. It doesn't matter if this shirt changes color every 5 minutes, as long as it doesn't demand that somebody digs up a field to do it constantly. And so what we mean by fast and slow and value and consumption is about to change, and the supply chain has to be ready to deliver to that. Here's an interesting question. Those people in the room, do you want your fibers back? You know, when you've finished with your clothing and you put it into this new supply chain, and you say, I'd like a new shirt, please, and I'm going to give you my old shirt. Do you want the same fibers and molecules coming back? Is your attachment at that level, or is your attachment emotionally to the concept of recycling and reuse? And you don't mind that your molecules get put into a vat and therefore get distributed and may end up on everyone's back. And there may be customers who actually want their own little micro processing because they want their fibers back, because those particular fibers, that might have been the dress you wore, the suit you wore when you made your amazing presentation, and you want it back. You want those very things back. You're willing to pay for a special shape of supply chain to achieve that. Or you may just want the value of knowing that everything you bring back is going to a good home. Now, we have to build supply chains to help all those things. And I look forward to working with everyone in the room to achieve that. Thank you.
Thanks, Steve. So Steve is joined by Ali Azadipour of the Royal College of Art. Back to you, Adam.
Thank you. The way you ended that was fascinating. I mean, I'd love to understand the economics of how a new supply chain system would work, where I buy a shirt once and it just keeps coming back to me in various new shorts. But I think that's probably a discussion for another day. In terms of a sort of start off question for this, I mean, I think I'd like to understand how two parts of this question really. One is I'd like you to do a bit of future gazing about how a supply chain of the future might look, bearing in mind that current supply chains really are set and dominated by big retail. It's big retail who source the cotton. It's big retail who do the ginning, you know, and the spinning and the fabric, and all of that happens in hundreds of different places around the world. How are you going to interact with big retail to make sure that they take these on board, and therefore how do you see that future supply chain?
Well, I'll start with this one, and Ali, if you want to join in. I think that what's the future supply chain look like? It's going to be really different, isn't it? But at least we'll be able to see it. And I think that's different to today. Today, we only see the retail end. We as consumers, when we talk about the supply chain, we only see one part of it. And you absolutely point to the core here. There's a lot of power to be, and it can be a very negative word, but it's great coordinating power. And we use the coordinating power of the retailer to be able to deliver amazing value to so many people so quickly. How do we distribute that power while somebody with that power, the incumbent, watches and stands by? And they're going, wait a minute, am I losing some agency here? And there's a real issue about how that might happen. I'm going to suggest two possible futures, and it'll probably be a mix between those two and the third option. The third option is we fight not to lose that agency. One option is that we fight and lose. So smaller non-incumbents come in and just take our party away. I think the third option, which is the one we're dominantly designing around, is that those retailers have to recognize their potential future role as a platform. They are incredibly good integrators, but that doesn't necessarily mean they should control everything in the future. So simplistic example, pop-up shops. Should we be having more pop-up shops with other designers coming into our retail space? And how do we enable that in a circular fashion? And I leave that as a very simple sort of current way of thinking.
And another question on supply chain that's sort of being asked, picked up in a number of the questions, is around new actors and new materials. I mean, I know we started off talking about material circularity, but I think one of the presenters talked about potatoes. And certainly I'm aware of a project that's already going on in the fashion industry where they're taking potato skins, turning them into a plastic, which is then being turned into buttons and glasses and stuff like that. There's a lot of focus at the moment around vegan supply chains, around vegan leather. Now, I know that my colleagues in Leather UK hate the term vegan leather, but those sorts of things, how are those supply chains going to expand to become more normal and to be able to meet the demands of consumers where we spend £80 billion a year on clothing? How are we going to upscale all those supply chains?
Well, I'm going to give an entry point to Ali to answer this, because I think that transparency of that, the biomaterials platform and the transparency tool are central, because if you are making a vegan option choice, you really want to be sure it is. And that transparency is incredibly important. But equally, if I'm designing something with a vegan leather, it is a rather interesting name, then I want to be really sure about its properties. How does it fold? How does it sew? Because it might not have exactly the same properties as standard leather. And so our tools are intended to solve those problems, even if we don't know exactly what they are yet. Ali?
Yeah, I'm just going to link it to the previous question as well. So how many of us actually knew there is no actually manufacturing building like hand sanitizers in the UK before pandemic? So actually this transparency and just having an idea about the journey of the material, which actually I can actually give an analogy of comparing this with the health informatics, raising patient awareness and all those talks around it. So we have the same thing in the consumers actually of the future. So I think if 20 years ago you're talking about how much water was consumed to just manufacture a pair of jeans, nobody cares. But now you have that like a awareness of consumers. So now you need to actually think about new digital solutions that providing that like a complete accurate information and hand it over to designers and consumers. So I can actually also extend on the consumer experience kind of strand, that human-centric is not limited only to the consumers, it's also actually across the supply chain as well, because that's the core idea of the Industry 4 and the fourth revolution of the UK and global industry, that even like the interaction between like actors in the supply chain and the machines actually affecting what is the experience of the consumer. And a good example of that is like you have the ingredients and you have the recipes when you're baking a cake, and that sweet, too much sweet is actually a trigger to understand sugar was too much in the recipe. So linking this information, providing this like information flow across the whole supply chain and the consumer will actually help us to build up that like a proof of concept and a scalable system for the future. And we can learn from other industries.
Just picking up on the hand sanitizer example, do you think that this whole circularity piece provides opportunities for UK manufacturing? Because there is a lot of, I mean, there's 120,000 people working in UK manufacturing and fashion and textiles at the moment, but there are huge chunks of the industry where we don't have manufacturing in the UK, be that volume garment manufacturing, quite a lot of fabric manufacturing. Do you see that with these new materials and digitalization and stuff like that, that there are opportunities for a better manufacturing supply chain in the UK?
I think I'll try and answer that. I think that if I work on this problem across different sectors, and I would argue that the politics of this is incredibly important. If we try to grab our supply chains from elsewhere and just re-import them in a simplistic fashion, we'll fail, because the products will become much more expensive than people are used to. The supply chain designs and movements won't enable that. But if we look into the future, it is rather obvious that if we are growing less stuff, cotton, let's say, in order to satisfy greater quantities of consumption of value, because it eventually becomes 5 t-shirts rather than 1 t-shirt, it goes around 4 times, let's say, then that going around 4 times is unlikely to happen in China. So it is very clear that the production system will change significantly if we move towards circularity, but the exact shape of that still needs to be worked out. If all we do is believe that we're going to pull those factories back from China here as a simple plug and play, and that's my fear, that the politics of this is incredibly simplistic, but the practicality is not simplistic.
A final one for me, I think, on this supply chain is that we've focused, understandably, particularly because of the consumer piece, around the sort of the aspect of the industry that we all know about, the clothes that we wear, and you know, the fabrics in my blinds and stuff like that. Do you see possibilities and advances for the industry, because we certainly talked about 3D weaving and processes like that, for reaching out to other industries? You know, textiles historically has been an industry that has touched pretty much every other industry that you could possibly think of. And I just wonder whether that's fed into your thinking so far about how you can reach the automotive industry, the medical industry and stuff like that. I mean, take medical as an example, you know, again, on that hand sanitizer piece, the amount of waste, that's textile waste, that's coming out of the medical industry pre-pandemic and now during and post-pandemic is enormous. And how do we deal with those sorts of things? So a bit of a broad question about how we take the learnings from our consumer experiences and apply them to other industries.
So it's actually a great question, and I'm fairly, if I was honest, the answer that we have at the moment is pretty pathetic. But you're pointing in a really important direction. So within the world of industrial symbiosis, we recognize that there's a sort of standard formula. It says, if a waste that my industrial system, whether it's cars or textiles, produces, that is already usable within the same sector, the chances are somebody's found a use for it. So actually, there's a demand that you work very well with other sectors. Now, the clothing sector is not too bad at working with farmers, and we are trying to make that relationship much more open and agile and close in the Textiles Circularity Centre. So I'd like to assure somebody who asked the question, we are worried about soil health, right? It'll be one of our measures of performance environmentally. But we don't have maybe that same historical relationship with the automotive sector or with the health sector. And there may well be opportunities there. In the world of industrial symbiosis, we call this the kissing frogs problem, right? You got to kiss a lot of frogs to find the prince. And which sector should you be working with? Well, if I knew, then we wouldn't be asking the question. And so this is one of the challenges of supply chain design. How do you open up a market space so that those sectors can come in and find interesting materials, or even say, we've got interesting raw materials, you might have some interesting uses and value generation possibilities for that. And that's part of the problem that we're trying to solve.
Can I add also the output of enabling technologies like this biomaterial platform to the other industries? Like the textile is not only used for handbags, they can be used for seat covers, they can be used for like car roofs, and having people in the like a virtualization of this experience actually is really helpful, because you're reducing the production cost, you're reducing the carbon footprint, but at the same time you can provide like a new strand of applications for your product in the future. So that's quite helpful to have this digitalization kind of concept.
That's great, Steve. Ali, thank you very much indeed. We're out of time. My apologies if you did ask a question and I didn't ask it on your behalf. But Sharon, back to you.
Great. Thank you so much. So now we're going to move on to the final part of the session, which is stakeholder groups networking session. So you'll see on this slide that we have 5 breakout groups. As I said at the beginning, we are continually seeking new partnerships with different stakeholders who want to go on this research journey with us. So for industry, Steve Evans is convening that one. Research and development, Miriam is convening that one. NGOs, I'm convening. Citizen, consumer, public, Bruno is convening that one. And then government and policy, Phil Pinnell is convening that. So as I said, this is an opportunity for you to have more intimate discussions with maybe how you would like to partner or collaborate with us, and to get to know more. So in a moment, there will be a kind of a poll sheet which will allow you to choose which stakeholder group you're going to join, and then 11:55 we're back on this link just to close. Thank you.
Hi there, everybody. Just to confirm that there should be a button at the bottom of your screen where you're able to select your breakout room. Otherwise, please put the name of the room into the chat and you'll be moved automatically. We are now in breakouts until 11:55 UK time.
Hi, I cannot
Hi, Gary. Sorry to hear that it crashed. If you let us know the name of the room, we can move you there now. Hi there, Hannah. I can see that you are actually already assigned to research. So you should be able to find a button on your command bar at the bottom that says breakout rooms. If you click on that.
Yeah, so click on breakout rooms, yeah.
Yeah, and then you should find one that says research. There'll be a button that says join to the right of that. There should be a button that says join somewhere in that panel that will get you back in.
Right, I can't see the join. I can just see the research list. Oh, I see. Sorry, I'll join. Thank you.
You got it? No problem. Enjoy the breakout.
Thanks.
And for anyone else still in this main room, the rest of the group is still in breakouts for another 12 minutes or so. If you would like to join a breakout room, please either find the button on your command bar at the bottom of your screen or place a message in the chat to tell us where you would like to go. The available breakouts are on your screen now. Thank you.
Well, just to say thank you very much for coming today. I hope you've enjoyed the session. And as I said, we are continually seeking new partnerships for the Textiles Circularity Centre. Yvonne Castle, who's there on the slide, is our centre manager, and that's the email address if you'd like to get in touch, tcc@rca.ac.uk. So again, thank you very much for coming, and I hope you enjoyed the session. Thank you.